all that stuff is still in there. Everything that you've been exposed to in your life is still in there. The problem is access. Can't figure out how to access the stuff that's actually in there.
This podcast is part of the Blueberry Network, where listeners and podcasters come together. Find out more at blueberrywithnoease.com.
The Eat Sleep Right podcast is brought to you by generous grant from the Built on Dreams Media Network, with additional funding by the Sims Media Foundation, and from the generosity of listeners like you.
Stand by, please. Going on set. On set.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 54 of the Eat Sleep Right podcast. I'm your host, Adam Scull. The podcast is available at eatsleepright.net, as well as downloadable from the iTunes Store, where you can also subscribe to it. The Eat Sleep Right podcast is also enjoyable at the Public Radio Exchange at prx.org. Regular listeners know my purpose is to find out how writers became authors, how they got where they are, how they do what they do, and how they go from a blank piece of paper to a finished manuscript. If you enjoy the Eat Sleep Right podcast, or you've had your own success in writing, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me about yourself and your story, and I may get back to you and have you as a guest on the Eat Sleep Right podcast. If you have any questions or comments, anything at all, please write me. The email address is comments@eatsleepright.net. Dante Petrilla, author of The Secret of Your Perfect Memory, welcome to the Eat Sleep Right podcast. It's great having you with me today.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Cheers.
To all those, including myself, that say my memory seems to be failing me, is this something we can really improve upon?
Oh, absolutely we can. It's actually very easy to do as well, once you get the gist of what's going on, which doesn't take very much time at all. The book itself is short, it's to the point, it's not too technical, it's very, very simple, not complicated at all. It's just over 100 pages, and in as little as a few days' time, you can improve your memory by up to 300%, depending upon how your memory is at the moment.
You write the book is niche-specific in terms of memory improvement, but improving one's memory has a knock-on effect that improves other areas of life: confidence, rapport building, communication, etc. Yet for all the things I can remember, I feel I have plenty of black holes about things that I cannot remember for the life of me.
All that stuff is still in there. Everything that you've been exposed to in your life is still in there. The problem is access. Can't figure out how to access the stuff that's actually in there. This is a problem that a lot of people face when they're in school or college. They've studied for the test. They're going in to sit down to take the exam. They're under pressure. They feel like they've got to perform, and they're nervous and anxious. They can't bring this stuff out. It's inside them, but they can't get to it. This is a lot of what happens as well with regard to things that have gone on in our past. We don't usually think about this stuff as we're going on through our day-to-day life, dealing with the business of life. We're not thinking about what happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago. But if we actually sit down, like you mentioned, have a conversation with somebody about all that kind of stuff, it begins to come back to us. You will see the same kind of thing in Alzheimer patients, some of whom are in quite advanced years. They will remember things with so much clarity from 50, 60 years ago sometimes, that they actually believe that they're there at that moment. They can see the sights, they can hear the sounds, they can smell the smells. That's because all that stuff is still there. What the book teaches is how to store things in such a way that your access is instantaneous. You learn something, you are essentially given a place to put that something so that you know exactly where to go to get it. It's like when you go to get your mail. You know where to go to get the mail. It's in the mailbox. The mailman knows to put the mail in the mailbox. That's how you know to get it there. It's always there. Works in exactly the same way. You create lots of little quote-unquote mailboxes in your mind, and you store bits and pieces of information in those places. And then when somebody asks you to recall the information, bang, you go right to the place where it is. You're able to pick it out. When we spoke the last time, I described this like a library. You know how a library works. When you've got a book that you want to get, you go in there, everything's in order, all the books are on shelves, they're alphabetized by author, they're categorized, and if your book is in that library, you're going to be able to find it very, very quickly. If you take it a step further and imagine a library that has all the information that has ever been put down on paper by the human species in it, you get the opportunity to go into this magnificent library to look for your book. You go in there, and instead of finding rows and aisles with shelves of books that are alphabetized and categorized, you just find stacks of books, mountains of books everywhere. You start to sift through them and you realize that they're not in any particular order. You've got mysteries next to cookbooks and things like this, and you just can't get to what you want. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. That's an untrained mind. The library that I've just described there is an untrained mind. That's the way we learn stuff. We're not told or taught how to learn stuff in school. We're just given the information. It's up to us to go over it again and again and again until it sinks in eventually, which is not a particularly powerful way to memorize things. We just kind of put it in there wherever. And that's the problem with all the stuff that we know. It's just in there somewhere. And we got to go to sift through all this stuff to find it. The book describes different ways, different techniques in which you can associate new information to information that's already in your existing body of knowledge. The first thing that I do is kind of explain association and how we memorize things by linking them on to things that are already in there.
How did you go from writing poetry to magazine articles to improving your memory?
What I really did, Adam, was I got out of myself. The poetry was really all about me and trying to express all the deeper feelings that I had about stuff that had gone on in my past and was going on in my present when I was writing that stuff. And it was all pretty dark, and a lot of it was depressing, and I really just stepped out of that. I began to look at other things. I began to read other things. I took a course with the Writers Bureau, which is a writing correspondence course, and in that was introduced to the idea of writing nonfiction. I began to write articles then, sent a number of them away to different magazines. They were picked up, they were published, which was quite exciting, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and that gave me the confidence to think, okay, well, yeah, I could actually write a nonfiction book if I wanted to. Then I came across this idea of memory improvement. Always been into self-help material ever since I was in my mid-20s, I suppose. This was the only thing I had ever picked up in the self-help world that I went, wow, this is amazing. This is unbelievable. I've got to share this with the world. I immediately began to tell all of my family and friends about this stuff, and I just was eager to share it. Voraciously read everything that I could get my hands on about this stuff. Began to realize that the world of it was pretty small. There wasn't a whole lot in here. There are different viewpoints of how to employ these techniques and things like that. There wasn't a whole lot here. It was very simple. It's something that you can share with somebody in a 10-minute conversation. I just had this incredible desire inside of me to share this with as many people as I possibly could. And that's when I got the idea, okay, I'll write my own book. I began to take lots of different notes. I came up with this idea of the knowledge village, which is a mechanism that if you really wanted to and took it to its nth degree, you could memorize 10,000 items in order back to front if you wanted to.
How can a writer apply your skills to their own writing?
It really depends on what the author is writing. If he or she's writing nonfiction, then what they will learn in this book will allow them to memorize facts that they will pick up from different publications at their fingertips anytime they want it. Different experience for a fiction writer, though. They might be writing from a point of view of a character that they have very little connection with in terms of themselves. The character may be vastly different to who they are. It might be more difficult. They might be drawing a lot more on inspiration and imagination than they would memory.
What was the easiest part of writing your book? What was the most difficult?
The easiest part of it, I suppose, was just putting all this stuff into my own words. It wasn't really something that I had to work particularly hard at. It kind of wrote itself, Adam. It really did. It was quick, very quick book to write. Kind of just flowed. The most difficult part, I suppose, has to do with coming up with the knowledge village. That was something that I stewed over for quite some time, and I created a graphic that represents it, and that was time-consuming and somewhat arduous.
And you wrote this book in how long?
It was pretty quick, Adam. It took about maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. It was pretty quick. It's a nonfiction book based upon something that I had read a lot about and listened to a lot of different courses on. It's a short book as well. It's just over 100 pages.
Right.
So it's not a big tome that's going to take ages to read.
What's the most interesting thing you've learned as a writer?
It's a good question, Adam. Thank you. Probably that I have an ability inside of me to communicate on a level that I don't think I have with my voice. I can say things as a writer that I probably would have difficulty saying with my voice. I can get my point across a lot better.
What's the takeaway advice you give writers who hear you speak?
In terms of wanting to be a successful writer, just write. Continue to write constantly. Don't stop writing. The more you write, the better you get at it. I would also say, watch people, watch how they interact, particularly if you're a fiction writer. Watch how they communicate, not just with their words, but with their body language. That will give you a deep insight into how we interact. That kind of thing is very, very helpful for helping the interaction of the characters in your stories.
Can you read us an excerpt from your book?
I can, certainly, yeah. A lot of people think they're not all that bright, or they're just of average intelligence. And some others think they're pretty smart. And they're right. They are. But so is everyone else. They just don't realize it yet. Part of the reason why some people underachieve has to do with the fact that no one learns how the brain works. Some people are just better at figuring out that magnificent computer without instructions than others are. But those people really have to work at it. Very few people have true genius come to them as easily as falling off a log. It isn't that one person is smarter than another, but the person who appears to be smarter is someone who has simply discovered more of the potential of the mind than those around him. So he stands out as being smart. But in reality, all the other people who have been looking jealously at this person, wishing to be just as smart, have the same ability and potential to be just as smart. It's a mere matter of learning how to use the brain. In school, our brains really aren't stimulated that much at all. We learn to memorize facts and figures and concepts by the rote method or by whatever method we can figure out for ourselves. Homework is assigned and the teacher says, okay, go home, study chapters 2 through 4 because there'll be a test on it on Friday. But the teacher never tells you how to study that material. Most kids read it, make a few notes as they go, they get fed up, they get bored, and give up. When the test day comes, they just hope for the best. Nowhere in that dull process is the full brain involved or truly engaged in any meaningful way. So how can we get the whole brain involved? How does it work? Well, we know today that we have 2 brains. What? 2 brains? What, are we aliens or something? No, not quite. More accurately, we can say that our brain is divided into 2 halves, the left cortex and the right cortex. These 2 halves work independently of each other, and each half deals with different aspects of thought. The left cortex is the logical part of your brain. It deals with the logical, sensible stuff like numbers, words, order, sequence, and things like that. It's the analytical half. An easy way to remember that is to think left, logical, 2 L's. The right cortex deals with everything else, your sense of rhythm, music, imagination, color, dimension, spatial awareness, and it's also the seat of your ability to look at the bigger picture, something called gestalt. An easy way to remember that is to think right, rhythmic, 2 R's.
Where can listeners and readers find out more about you and your book on the internet?
You can look for me on Amazon.com. I have a number of books published there. You can look for me on Smashwords.com. I've got all my books published on many, many different e-reader formats. I've got a website, which is doorwaytohappiness.com. Got a blog, which is yourhealthyeverything.com. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter as well.
You have a special offer for our listeners?
A little book called Change Your Beliefs, Change Your Life. If you want to download that book, listen to the audio version of it, you can go to www.doorwaytohappiness.com/audio. You get a PDF of it there, and you can download the audio version as well. This will help people to examine what their beliefs are. Our beliefs really are the things that govern our experience of life. Most people are not aware of what their beliefs are. This little book is designed to help people discover that and to see if the beliefs that they have about various different things are actually supporting them or not supporting them in who they are and who they desire to be. It'll help people change the beliefs that are not taking them where they want to go.
Dante Petrilla, author of The Secret of Your Perfect Memory, thank you so much for being with me today on the Eat, Sleep, Right podcast. I know my listeners will enjoy your work and your interview.
Adam, again, thanks so much for the opportunity. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
If you're looking for a community that can offer you tools, support, and advice to start your own adventures in writing, be prepared to have the cauldron of your imagination stirred. I started Eat, Sleep, Write for one purpose: to do everything I can to get your voice heard about your writing and more eyes on your books. My goal is to help you achieve the success you so richly deserve. I salute your success in writing.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, located at eatsleepwrite.net. Please send any questions, comments or suggestions to comments@eatsleepwrite.net. Please consider a donation to support the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast. Donations can be sent to our PayPal address at donations@eatsleepwrite.net. Once in a lifetime, the theme music for the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast, courtesy of Stephen Paul, all rights reserved, used by permission. Please join us again for the next edition of the Eat, Sleep, Write podcast.